and accepted, we can get rolling. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is a nice group here. If I haven't met you yet, with COVID, it's been kind of hard to put all the faces to the names. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Tafira Rushton. Everybody calls me T. I am a co-director at Keep Going Detroit. I work alongside Keto and our education and capacity building team. And I'm very proud to bring you this series, this indoor growing series, just to keep us active and moving in these slower winter months and thinking about our gardens. We really launched this series thinking about right at 2020, Akello and all of us were pulling out our hair, trying to make sure we got all the transplants going. And a number of greenhouses and nurseries in the area were experiencing issues with COVID. I don't know if you remember all of that. And it really triggered the fact that we need more people in our area growing transplants for the sustainability of this movement. And so we started this series. It is a 3-part series. If you missed the first one, it is available on YouTube. I can grab the link and throw it in the chat once we get going. But that was all about the setup, and that was with Tiffany Pilson with Red Flower Growers. So I can put that link in the chat. And this is the second class, so we'll actually go through the actual transplant production. Akello is joining us. He is our farm manager, and he is responsible for all of the baby transplants that you guys pick up in the spring. He is the ultimate person who plans them and make sure that they are growing properly. And then we also have Merle, who is doing some indoor growing and has become somewhat of a local expert in it. And so they'll both be sharing some knowledge with you today. And then later in the class, our third class is we want to invite, I haven't talked to you about this yet, Akello, but I wanted to invite this whole class to open hours in March to get some hands-on experience at the farm. And so you and I can coordinate on that, but I figured we just invite them to open hours as like a third session. And alongside the 3 classes, there is a sign-up sheet for an indoor growing kit, which includes lights and timer and some trays to get going in your home. So I'll be passing out that link and more information about that. And who's starting between you guys?
I'll be starting us off.
Okay. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I can relay. Is that okay with you if we cut into your lecture time, both of you, or would you prefer to wait till the end?
We'll see how it plays. We're going to try and go for a bit more conversational flow.
Okay.
And if it's the right timing, we'll answer the question.
Okay, I'll try to cut and interject, you know what I mean? So if you have a question, throw it in the chat and I'll get it up to Akello and Merle.
Thanks for setting everything up, T. It's really nice to see you today.
Oh, yes. Good to see you too.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this beautiful day. Let's hope we get outside after this, maybe go start some transplants afterward. And thank you, T, for the introductions. And so I'm going to just pull up our PowerPoint and share it. Let me know if we're on. Looks like so. Okay. All right. And so me and Merle, we're both transplant producers. And so this has been a very fun time with me and them creating our conversation or presentation for you all to share with. So it's been a lot of, talk and shop between me and Merle. And so we're happy to, finally present this with you all and, keep the conversation going. So the idea that we have with this is that the slides are going to be in the background, but it's going to be really me and Merle having a conversation. And so we'll try to, figure out ways to get you all also a part of the conversation as well through the chat, the questions and such. And so if you have any questions at any point, feel free to. We are going to kind of be chronologically working through the kind of growth of a plant. So starting from the planting stages, understanding the growing season, to figuring out the transplants, that how many transplants you need to purchase, and then the materials and so on. And also we will be building off of the previous class. And so in that previous class, a lot of conversations were had about materials and setting up your grow room. And so if you're looking for more highlighted information about that, we'll just be touching on that briefly, but please check out the previous class if there's things that we are missing as far as the setup goes. And in this class, we'll look to go a little bit more into depth about the particular transplant, production process. And so
Yeah, Kello, I was actually wondering if we could ask if anybody wanted to drop in the chat if they did or didn't attend that first class, just so we had an idea.
Oh, please do, everybody.
Cool.
Please do. And this class is a partnership between the community. And so we have Merle, who's going to be presenting and sharing their knowledge of transplant production with us. And I'm going to be helping tag along, with that. And so I'm going to pass it to Merle to introduce theirself.
Hey, everybody. I just want to thank T again for setting this class up and hosting the chat room, and Akello. It's been really cool getting to know you, and I kind of feel like a little, I don't know, just honored that I got to be a part of this, because I'm definitely no expert, but it's been really cool just being part of the Keep Growing Detroit community and the Garden Resource Program since I moved back to the Southeast Michigan area to Detroit like 3 years ago. And just being part of the Garden Resource Program, first as a family garden, and then last year I had decided, I think like late 2021, that I wanted to take the steps to become a market garden. And I had been just a part of all of the trying to attend the classes that KGD's been offering. And I mean, everything is just set up so well through KGD to be able to learn and be empowered to take those next steps. And so I was able to become a market gardener and sell through Grown in Detroit. And I decided to kind of get into some medicinal herb transplants, thinking about where I could kind of plug into what's already all the amazing work that other people are doing with transplant production, especially Keep Growing Detroit, not just wanting to replicate things that are going on. So yeah, I can get into more of that as we go on. In my experience, I like the idea of this being a discussion, and people who are attending to chime in with where they're at and what their special interests are, so that we can tailor the class to everybody and leave with feeling good and empowered to get on with your transplant production for the season. So yeah, I started Lyndon Street Farm last year. That's just the name. It was my family garden, food forest. I put in a hoop house. I kind of scaled up my own DIY approach to seed starting that I've kind of been into for the last 10 years, right as I got into gardening when I was 23. I'm 34 now. I just really loved the seed starting process. I really felt that magical, the spiritual, just everything about it. I love starting plants from seeds and sharing them and the whole journey. And so I've just been developing and gaining skills, mostly, like I said, through trial and error, DIY, researching online, and just collaborating with other people. And then more recently, trying to learn from other people. At Beaverland, there's a community greenhouse there that I've been renting some space out as I scale up. And I think that's a good start for now. And maybe, Akello, you could tell us a little bit about where you're coming from and what you're doing with Keep Growing Detroit.
Yeah, thank you, Merle. And so I've been leading the transplant production for Keep Growing Detroit for, I guess this will be my 7th year. Started off in, I guess, officially 2017 as my first season. And so our garden resource program, we're growing and distributing transplants and seeds to about 2,000 gardens within the city of Detroit. And I guess back in 2016 or so, we were around, what, about 1,200 gardens, or I think 1,400 gardens. And so moving up there, along with also increasing our transplant capacity and growing as well. And typically in our side of our greenhouse, we're growing about 250,000 transplants throughout the year. And when that comes out to flats, that's about 3,000 flats that we do between Earthworks and us at Keep Growing Detroit. And we recently just started a partnership with University of Michigan, my old farm teacher from the Student Organic Farmer Training Program, Jeremy Mottater, is helping us out with a couple of transplant productions. And I guess a little bit of my background too. I really started just growing up food in my mom's backyard and working at a couple of community gardens throughout high school. And I guess personally, I was sure didn't really, instantly transition to agriculture and so on. Went to college to go study pre-law a little bit, but then came back home, and a community member who had taken over the garden I was working in high school, they were running their Food Warrior program with DBCFSN, and they knew that I worked in that garden. They were like, hey, we got this opportunity to work as a site assistant coordinator. And I was like, definitely, sign me up. And so that was my first foot into working and making a living working with plants and also doing education when I was back in 2014, 15. And then I got involved with Keep Growing Detroit through their youth apprentice program that we have going on this year. Sign ups and applications are out. Shout outs to T for that. So if you're interested in joining up, feel free to. And yeah, so getting back to the transplant production part, I can definitely be long-winded, but it's definitely been a learning process. Farming is all about risk management, and guaranteeing that you have those transplants for people is not an easy task, not a hard task, but a task that you definitely have to be focused on and organized for, and also in tune with the schedule of nature and working with nature. And going to use that to segue into our next slide. And so, Merle, I'm going to pass it to you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and before we jump into the planting date and everything, I was just curious, like, what have you been up to at the farm, like, over this winter, and how are you feeling about, like, everything coming up with the transplant production and jumping in?
I feel that, this year there's a lot of new things and improvements that we're making. And so this winter for me has been spent on making improvements on my germination chamber and also putting beds to rest as well, working with the farm. And so just making improvements on like guaranteeing our transplant quality. That's really been a big thing this year. And we have a couple of new tools that we're also going to be testing out. And so really it's just been a sharpening of the tools type of winter for me, and also trying to relax well and so on. And also had a follow-up question for you too, Merle. What got you started and interested in farming?
I also went like for a different career path originally. I was into actuarial math, and so I got like a math degree, and I was working at like a life insurance company after college, and just really feeling unsatisfied. Like I was missing out on a lot of things and confused about what that was, and just kind of had like eventually realized I needed to leave that and put myself in a different environment. And the place I decided to live had like this really big nice garden, like they had started in the backyard and then in the front yard. And I just kind of like jumped right in. I was really excited. It was like exactly what I had been looking for and didn't know. I was like 23, like I said. And I think that first season, just like getting right into starting plants by seed, then from there it just always was like part of it. I didn't consider like not doing it. And something just really something within me is really really like starting seeds and nursing plants. And then I love the farming aspect too, you know, growing things out, harvesting, and I've done some harvest jobs and whatnot, but growing the little babies out is just my favorite.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And cool,
But
cool.
yeah, and then like segueing into when to start seeds, when do you even start thinking about like that? We were just talking about, you know, what you've been up to over the winter. When do you feel like your mind kind of shifts into that, like, all right, now I'm starting to plan and I'm looking at these spreadsheets and the dates and everything?
Yeah, for me, it begins with the garden research program. And so we try to match the dates of those distributions to when it's going to be best to give out, you know, all those different types of plants that we give. So for those not familiar with the garden research program, we do 3 distributions throughout the year, one for cold crops. Those are like collards, kales, transplants, or collard kale transplant seeds, and so on. That happens in May. And then we have a hot crop where we give out tomatoes, peppers, cucumber seeds, tomatoes, peppers, and transplants in May. And then we do a pretty much another co-crop, but just in the fall in July, where we give out just another copy of those collards, kale, maybe a little basil in there as well. And so those distributions are matched or kind of spaced out between the ideal time to plant those plants and also when to get them to people. And so when I go and do my planning for the transplant production program, it's going to be based on, all right, when do I start these seeds so that they're looking, you know, as full and beautiful as possible for people to get them and, you know, be able to plant them at the right ideal time. And so that's my personal way, well, at least for as far as the garden research program works. How about you, Merle?
For me, I think it happens during like the end of year when people are celebrating their different holidays and wrapping up the year and thinking about the next year. And I think I found myself like on December 25th, I was starting to look for the lavender and the rosemary seeds to get those because like with shipping these days, like you don't really know what to expect. And so I think just trying to be ahead of the game. I started at the end of last year, and yeah, now I'm starting. I think that thing where you start to feel like you're starting too early and like jumping the gun, and then all of a sudden you're like feeling like a little stressed, like maybe you're behind. But like what I was hearing from you, Cal, was cool is that like because this is going on in your 7th year with the garden resource program, transplant production, that you kind of have your systems in place. So you spent the winter sharpening your tools and improving your systems, and you kind of have like you already know you have your 3 distribution dates, and then and did you were you able to share that spreadsheet in the chat so we could pull that up and kind of look how you all break it down into weeks? And
Can do. Let me pull it up right
cool.
now. And hopefully that transitions for everybody to see as well. And so I guess season-wise, Michigan's, or at least Detroit's, at least within our area, our zone, our growing zone, our typical last frost dates are between May 1st and May 31st. So at some point between that period, we'll get maybe our last frost, and then we're free to, like, you know, plant our warmer season crops that can't really deal well with the coolness or the coldness. And then there are some cold hardy transplants that can deal with that, and thus we give out plants in April. And then our first frost date, when we get it again in the year, would be between the periods of October 1st and October 31st. And so that's when we typically get our first frost or so on. That happens, and a frost is defined as temperatures hitting around 28 degrees and then dust freezing over at night. And so that's kind of like our first light frost and such. And so that's kind of our boundaries for growing outside. This doesn't really take into consideration if you have a greenhouse or not. Of course, if you have a greenhouse or hoop house, you get a little bit more wiggle room, especially if you're using like a heated greenhouse and so on. And so here on the sheet we use to kind of keep things in order for us. We try to put the growing season into perspective, where we have the weeks broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 52 weeks. And so week 1, for example, let's start on the 1st and then end on the 7th, and then going all the way down and so on. And so we also have here outlined for everybody the frost dates, and I have to move my Zoom settings a little bit. They're right in the way for me. Pardon. And then our first frost day where it typically happens, so week 18. And so right now we're in the middle of week 6, I believe. Pardon.
Folks
Yeah,
want
it
to know
looks
if you
like
can share that spreadsheet or.
Yeah, I'll when I get a moment, I'll post in the chat, but it is in the it is going to be in the PowerPoint. It's linked in for everybody.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we're at the last day, 2/11 of
Yeah.
week 6,
So
which is
making use,
amazing.
yeah, making use of this sheet. So right now we're in week 6, and we have here for the field planting. If you're going to be planting out in the field, these are kind of going to be your ideal start weeks for your transplants. And so you don't technically have a deadline or such, but you do have a period where it's good for you to start your transplants. And so these are the recommended ones. And so if you're going to do some heirloom tomatoes, recommending that you start those transplants in week 11, and then potting them up. And the translations are here for people to see.
Yeah.
And we also have hardening off, which we'll talk about what those mean in the. Oh, please, Merle.
Oh yeah, I think we were gonna go down the column of week 6 and see is there anything that you have started already? Like what is in week 6? I think was it the onions and
Yeah.
the leeks that was last week.
Yeah, so we have for those who are in hoop houses, and you can also do onions as well for the field in week 5 and week 6.
Cool.
You could definitely get some onions started about now. If you're going inside of a hoop house, this bottom side is just for that. And we even have a special indicator for if you're trying to sell some transplants. So that like peak period of like when those plants are going to be beautiful indicated here. And so this will kind of give you a map or a visual map of, the trajectory of the growth of transplants. Transplants, they don't really take that long to grow. Like you're starting this in week 11. If you got some tomatoes, that's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then you're hardening off for a couple of weeks. But transplants typically going to be inside of our in our setup or inside of their germ chamber inside for about a month or so, and then they're out in the door. And so we don't really have like a long time with them on the inside, and so it's important that we baby them and care for them as much as possible, and then send them off to college when they're ready.
Okay, Lo, you introduced a word that maybe not everybody's familiar with, and hardening off. Maybe a lot of people are from the Garden Resource Program, but if folks are new to dealing with transplants, can you tell us what that is?
Yeah. Yes. So hardening off, and we will highlight this again later on, but to give you all a picture. So before we, instantly, send those kids off to college or whatnot, plant them inside of the ground, we want to make sure that they're college ready. And so to kind of get them introduced to nature and introduced to new elements, because they've been inside this entire time. So outside is a foreign place to them. And so if we plant those plants outside, they would experience shock. So it would take them a while for them to really start to spread out and develop if we just planted them inside the ground. And so that's why we see transplants not grow instantly when we just plant them outside. It takes them maybe about a week or 2 to figure themselves out and get
as much as we're trying to what we're gonna go over in the presentation, as much as we're trying to mimic the like the outdoor environment for these seeds and seedlings to grow, the hardening off period is still like that final like transition from what we've been able to mimic to like really get them set up to succeed outdoors. And it's easy even after you've done it for a while to like forget that your healthy tomato plant that you've had inside, that when you bring it out, it seems like it's even a mild day. I know like 2 years ago, it was like I still kind of like I left them out too long and it was too sunny and hot, and they eventually kind of bounced back. But yeah, that hardening off period, you definitely don't want to like just kind of like drop off at that point and be like, oh, it's gonna be okay because you've done so much hard work up to that point. And so and it kind of can be a hassle. You have to like remember set alarms, like bringing them in and out, and life is always happening. And that's one thing I wanted to kind of add to this timeline is um I think I saw somebody in the chat was like super excited, like, why haven't I been doing this? And I was thinking the same thing, like, why haven't I been using this organization? Which is why I love Keep Growing Detroit and all these resources. But adding in your own personal timeline, because this is like your ideal, and a lot of the stuff we're going to be sharing today is, ideals or principles, and but like when it comes to like executing that in real life, what that looks like. So if you have a vacation on week whatever 11, 12, 13, just kind of planning in your own timeline ahead of time so you can maybe not start your seeds right before you're going to go off somewhere when you're supposed to be like really babying them and you don't have anybody else to help. So yeah.
Okay, you guys had a couple questions in the chat about this chart, and
Yeah,
one
we
thing
can
I
spend
did.
time with that. Yeah.
Okay, one thing I did want to mention is the indoor growing kits. Last year we also did like text reminders for some of the common crops. So I'll probably be utilizing, I was using Johnny's chart, but I'll probably be using yours, Akello, and I just
Mhm.
wanted to make sure. So are you at the same time as what you would say for most indoor growers? Because I feel like GRP needs to come out a little bit earlier, or is this about the timeline for the average indoor grower, would you say? Do you know what I mean?
That's a good question.
Hmm. These are what my field planting time is for ideal like outside planting. So taking your transplants from inside to outside, working with nature. And so these are ideal for, I guess, the basic home gardener schedule, these transplant dates. And there are some, like there is some play in here between like, we got to get things out for everything out during the transplant production, the garden research program, which happens on certain days. But there is wiggle room in here. So if people aren't on this schedule, like if they're a week early or a week later, they're okay.
There's a
In
little
terms
wiggle
of
room. Okay, so we can, if
like,
you sign up for the indoor growing kit, we can send out a text reminder for some of these, and then is it Raya or Raya? I'm sorry if I don't want to pronounce your name wrong, but drop the Johnny Seeds calculator in there, which is a really nice tool.
Yeah.
But then there were a couple questions before we get too far.
Yeah.
So you mentioned germ chamber, and I think Raya tried to answer it there. But are you going to go over the germ chamber later? Or do you want
yeah,
to address
we're
it
going
now?
to talk about the germ chamber later,
Okay,
and to wrap up the seeding question and the pot up question. We'll
cool.
talk about it later, but quickly, seeding just meaning that you're starting the germination process, the breaking of the seed
Mhm.
coat where the radicle is going to emerge. So you're going to be either starting that seed in some soil and starting to grow it, and then the pot up process is optional depending on the process or setup that you have. But pot up literally meaning that you're going to take that seedling once you started it, and then you're going to pot it up into the next tray size or next larger soil space.
Mhm.
Because typically we're starting seedlings next to each other and in a way that we can like grow a lot of them or germinate a lot of them to get them start. And thus we have to give them a little bit more space. So we pop them up or we separate them out into a new area where they can have more space to grow. And then
Mhm.
so on. So it does look different from process to process, but potting up just literally refers to, potting up your plants, just like transplants, moving transplants. So very little hardening off, getting your plants, hard before you plant them outside. And if there aren't any more questions on this sheet, I will quickly copy it and post it in the chat, and then we'll move on to our next slide. All right. Okay, Meryl, I'm gonna pass this one to you.
Cool. It's what crops to start indoors and what crops not to start indoors. So generally we start seeds indoors for the following reasons. If the crops are long season and they don't like temps below 60 degrees, like for example, tomatoes, crops that are long season that we want to give a jump on growing to maturity by planting as transplants before the last frost, for example, collards. Crops that we want to have on hand for a succession planting after harvesting another crop from the field. For example, spinach after an early crop of radishes. So if you have it planned already and you have your spinaches germinated and seedlings already, it's gonna be a lot quicker of a transition and harvest time when you're pulling your radishes out than to when you're putting those spinach transplants in and then getting a first harvest of the spinach. That's something that I'm kind of like at right now with my garden planning, is trying to really like maximize my bed space by having all the planning and successions, and having like I predominantly have done like hot weather crop seed starting with the medicinal herbs and tomatoes and basil, the things I've mostly focused on. But the idea of like with KGD, how they have the 3 distributions, the cold weather, the hot crops, and then in the fall. So not just thinking about starting seeds indoors for like tomatoes, but also this idea of the spinach crop going in after an early crop of radishes. And then some things we don't want to start indoors. You can, and it's a cool experiment. And for kids, it's always cool to learn and see what happens. And if your goal isn't to like harvest the most amount of vegetables, it's not necessarily like you can't. But for example, root crops like carrots, beets, radishes, turnips, parsnips, if you start those indoors and then try to transplant them out in the field, you're going to disrupt them. They don't like it. They just want to be planted directly into the soil. I think, Akello, I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
the first organic farm that I worked at, they had produced all their transplants and they had a lot of successions of beets. And I think that they started beets. Is that one of those things that you can do either way? And what's your experience for
You can
that?
do beets either way. I have seen beet transplants. As far as our scale goes, we've done direct sowing of seeds. And another thing that you can also do transplants of, like there's like this thing called a paper pot seeder, which is the new hype, if you will. But you can do versions of transplants for your turnips, your radishes. And so it really is a timing thing, because a lot of these crops, well, from the farmer perspective, there are certain benefits and so on. And so benefits to doing things certain ways. So like, for example, carrot seeds, beet seeds, these radish seeds, turnip seeds, they're very inexpensive. And so it's just easy to direct sow them and then come back and thin your transplants or thin your seedlings to the right spacing.
Yeah.
And if you do have a different setup where you have like a transplanter or so on, you can make transplants of, I want to do carrots, but like beets and turnips and so on. And I've even done transplants of cucumbers, melons and such. It's just a timing thing where you can just put those outside. So
Right. Yeah. So finishing up with that slide, like you were saying with melons, squashes, cucumbers, we can start those indoors, but you really have to be mindful of your time window, because they have to be transplanted out young before the roots are starting to develop significantly. And you'll see the top growth is getting really big, and you'll see like, oh, I should probably get these out. And they do tend to perform better when direct seeded in the ground. But like we're always taking this information of like best practices and then thinking about how to apply them best to our own gardens and farms. So you might find that sometimes it is appropriate for you to start melons, squashes, or cucumbers indoors.
And to those that do want to start some melons and cucumbers and such, they're a bigger seed. So a bigger seed, an assumption of a bigger plant. And thus they will need a little bit more growing space in terms of their how much soil they have. And so if you're familiar with the Garden Resource Program, we might typically do like a 6-pack or 4-pack of plastic trays that we give out to people. But for our melons, I have a different size tray specifically just for those, called a 3-pack, which has a little bit of soil in them. And so there are like smaller nuances that each plant enjoys to get them done successfully. And for my watermelon transplants, or those in the cucurbit family, I'm typically starting those, if you looked at the schedule, in week 16, 17 as my range for like a field planting. And so I want to just share that with anybody who's interested or trying out some of those. And they also grow faster too, so that's why they're started a little bit later than like tomatoes and eggplants, which are like a week 11, a week 9, if you will. And so different plants have different growth rates and such, and that sheet kind of reflects that as well. And so anything else to add to this part, Merle?
Oh, I was just thinking about how last year from the Garden Resource Program, I got those melon transplants in a 3-pack, and I think that you had like maybe a lot of them, and I got a whole flat to grow, for market, like at a reduced cost or whatever. And so I planted them. I think like because they're kind of like leftovers, they had been sitting there probably a little longer than ideal, and I still planted them, and I still got a decent melon harvest from them. So just another reminder that even though there's the best practices that like I think we all like to try to like still plant the things in the garden and see what happens, and then it's always great to be able to share those experiences with other people and what you can really get away with doing and growing.
Cool. Thank you for using those transplants. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks for growing them.
All right, so now getting into, once we have our understanding of the seasons and kind of when we're going to start our transplants, now it's about how are we going to figure out, how much do we need to start? And so some of us might be planting inside of a raised bed garden. Some of us might be growing transplants, for sale, like Merle. And, some of us might even have like a field planting outside. And so there's all different types of spacing and so on to take into consideration. So I'm going to share the calculator that I use, and I'm going to show you all how you can use that too. And then I'll post it in the chat. This is an Excel spreadsheet. You just have to copy and create your own so you can make your edits in it. But it's going to show you pretty much. I mean, you'll all be able to see the farm planting for the farm. The farm plan. And I don't want to overwhelm you all with the information and such, but if you are interested, you can always just email me directly and we can, I can talk more in depth about it. But I just want to show you all a quick tool to calculate how many transplants you need.
Yeah, and while you're pulling that up, I was just gonna go back to the planning and just kind of like the process of thinking it all out. So at the end of this last year and now going into this new year, where you're thinking about what your goals are going to be, and just thinking about what your capacity is, maybe what you did last year, how much you started and how that worked out. Was it too overwhelming and became stressful and not that fun? Are you ready to take on another a new crop or a different variety? And I think I've just been realizing every year that like I can really get distracted by like the shiny new plants or like wanting to do everything, especially as people are like posting on social media everything they're doing and you want to do it all. That just having to like really think about what your goals are and keep focused, and that I think a goal is always to like have fun and not get too stressed about it.
And Merle, is there a particular change that you made this year from last year that you have identified?
Yeah, so as I was like trying to scale up and along with my like indoor growing, I also rented some heated space at the Brightmore Community Greenhouse, which is a really cool resource for small farms and just individuals. Um, I you get like you get like 20 to 40 trays with your monthly rental, and because I had that extra space and I was starting to think about, you know, selling at market and well, if the customers came to get like these plants, well then maybe they would want the other ones. And so I think I was just trying to do it all and like and so then I had so many different things going on, and I spent a lot of like time and energy at night potting the different things up. And I just kind of got led astray, and I still like met my goals, but I think I kind of burnt out a little bit then going into the rest of the season. Um, so
Gotcha. I guess a lot of my own changes and updates that I make definitely come from the farm staff. So people who've worked on the farm with me, we typically have meetings throughout the year where we talk about what went well, what went poorly. And then I also chat with our market team to figure out like what crops they really liked, what we, didn't sell that much, or like what people really wanted. And so there's a lot of input that I'm collecting throughout the year, just for the farm planting. And then for the garden research program, I love to get input from our GRP members. And so we send out surveys to collect what you all would like to see in the program. And so that's how we typically make our changes and updates. And then there's like small little tweaks and so on. And so I like to now talk about how to use this seed calculator sheet. And I'll just go over some of the columns. So this is for the farm planting. I have my fields, like each big field, which is has 10 beds in them. And so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 beds. That's field 1. And that's what that field 1 looks like in a month. And so in month 4, I plan on planting beets, right? And so that's my crop. I got different varieties here that I list. And to then figure out, how many beets I'm going to need for that particular planting. So for some, here I have just the entire length of that bed. It's 75 feet. If you have like a raised bed, you could change that to, 4 feet. And then that's going to change your math a little bit. And so for our beets, we do 5 rows. And so that's going to be 5 rows in that 4-foot path or that 75-foot length. And then I have the distance in between those seeds. So every 5 inches, and I have this in inches, it's already pre-calculated out. Let me see if I have that. So the formula kind of shows there. You all don't have to change that. Just make sure that I keep that in inches and that distinction there. And so
whoever said farmers weren't scientists, you know what I mean?
Trust me, I look at this once a year. No, I'm just kidding.
it is really cool to see the different personalities of different growers and farmers and their different organizational styles and planning.
No, I look at it all the time. Totally. So let's say, for example, okay, you got, your raised bed, it's 4 feet long. Oh, and if you have a pot, we can do a pot too. So I can show you that one as well. So you want to do 5 rows in that 4-inch bed, or if you want to do, 4 rows, that's going to change the math a little bit. Or if you just want to do 2 rows, you can edit that. And if you have a closer distance between your seeds that you want to do, say you want to direct sow those by hand, or if you have like a seeder, you can just kind of figure out what that's going to look like. So that also changes the math too. I'm just going to go back to 5. And so that's going to spit out, the exact amount seeds that you need. So I need 48 seeds to do my 4-inch raised bed. I need 900 seeds to do my 45-foot length bed. But then, and if I wanted to do a pot, let's just say, for example, the diameter of that pot is going to be a foot. I need 12 seeds to do that pot. And then, of course, if you don't want to do, it might look a little weird doing 5 rows in a pot, you can change that up a little bit, maybe do 2, and you need like 6 seeds total, or 5 seeds. So, it can look different. You can change it to however you need it to look, depending on your practice. So this it's not a monolith, it's flexible, easy to work with. And then if you want to do your entire field planting for the year, you could change the months, still have like the same field, but like, you want to swap something out, in that next month in that same field, for your organizational purposes. Now, we're not done yet once we have our calculations in here. And if you want to see the formula, it's all there for you. I'm going to add that. But we want to add a germination buffer because not every seed germinates. Not every seed is successful. And so I typically do about 30% germination buffer on every single crop. Some crops, I might do a 50% germination buffer if it's like a really difficult seed, like maybe something I just haven't had a good experience with. And then that's gonna, when I go into like purchase my seed, I'm gonna look to purchase, 62 seeds or, 1,000 seeds or, 16 seeds, or, you just have some extra seeds, when you purchase, you just wanna, that's gonna let you know, if you're ordering the right amounts or the correct amount that you need. And then if you wanna, since we're on this sheet, we'll talk about the other features of it, but it's also gonna let you know how many pounds per, from that you should expect. If you wanna do some marketing or selling that crop, you can also use that as well. And so I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint now and get back to that. So, and I can also just quickly post this in the chat for us too. All right, and so once you have it under, yeah.
Can I ask you a question about that? I didn't really think about it because I was using that spreadsheet after I took one of the farm planning classes that KGG just had, and I was thinking about it for direct sowing out into the field, like into the beds and everything. But how can we use that and translate that to kind of like the transplant production part of it?
Yes.
For example, like if somebody's trying to do a few raised, a few like 4 by 8 foot raised beds with something that needs to be transplanted, and how that would translate with the spreadsheet.
And so, excellent question. Let me go back to the sheet.
It kind of seems like a spreadsheet that can do a lot of things, and you can kind of like make some adjustments. And
it can do a lot of things, and there are a lot of things in here not to overwhelm people. But let me see if I have this distinction in here. So in this particular spreadsheet, I don't have the distinction in here and on whether it's a transplant or not. Let me see if I do. Ooh. And I can add that in here for you. Yeah, but so typically or ideally, Okello has. Oh wait, here we go. There we go. There it is. All right. So.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of in another separate thing, like this is going to be based off like how people want to do it. Whether they know they want to do a transplant of something or a direct sow something, that's what TP means, transplant. Direct sow means, or DS means direct sow, meaning you're directly planting something into the field. There's no transplant period. Transplant means that there is a indoor growing period, and so on. So another distinction that I make is just I go in here and like kind of plan out my succession planting, and this is kind of like behind the scenes right now for everybody. And so let's just take, for example, let's go down to my tomatoes. All right, I got my tomatoes here, and I got my ideal planting periods and so on. And so that's kind of like part one, where I kind of idealize or figure out what I want to do. And then I take that, and I can spend some more time on this sheet too, since we're here and just talking about it. But I believe those were these are going to be some greenhouse tomatoes that I'm doing. And so I have a greenhouse separator, and this is probably one of the tomatoes here. And so from there, I'm taking that information and plugging it into where I'm going to plant my plants. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of these tomatoes, I don't think I showed them. There it is. So the celebrity, the Amish that we just saw, these two, that's here. And so I do 1 row per bed. Those beds are 76 inches. So that's going to tell me how much I need to order. And there's also more information on how much we can expect to make off of that field and so on. And so that's just extra, more information, if you will. And so that's like, you really use this sheet to its maximum.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things in here, from field planting outline.
Yeah.
And so it does take a while. This is like, my system.
Yeah.
Well, and
yeah, thanks
even
for sharing a little more about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And of course, if people have questions about how to read it, or you missed that part, feel free to email me or use me as a resource. And yeah, so getting back to, once we understand how much seed we need, we learned how to account for germination rates. So by adding another buffer on top of what you already expect, so about 30%, by purchasing 30% more or 50% more, depending. But let's say we have some seeds that we have at home. And I'd like Miro you to share a little bit about doing a germ test.
Oh, cool. Did you say you had a little bit of a resource, like a video or something that you had linked it to?
I do have a nice little one pager for us. So
Cool. Okay, cool. A water test. A quick way of testing seeds is you could drop them in the water and see what they do. If they sink, they're probably viable. If they float, they're probably not viable. And this test works best for large seeds. It might not be reliable for small seeds like carrots or lettuce. Let's see. The paper towel test, a little more time consuming, but also more fun, and it could be cool to do with kids. Is by germinating them in a paper towel. You can, label it, moisten the paper towel, keep your seeds and varieties separate by labeling them well. You could do like 10 at a time. That would translate well to like percentages. If like 6 out of 10 germinated, then that would be your 60% germination rate. So actually, like,
yeah,
one thing is, with when I last year started and decided I wanted to do like this lavender project, germinating them, growing them from seed, and then selling them. I think I did around like throughout the different like outlets that I sold, like about 200 of the like 4-inch pot transplants. And I through research and just like looking at online at what other people were doing, somebody had recommended, like in this picture you see, it's a moist paper towel. That's 1 packet of seeds, minimum 100 seeds, so it's probably a little more. And then I put them in the fridge, labeled them, and I actually I kind of like used what I saw in the seed packet of like stratifying in the fridge, then I combined it with this method, which was basically like a germ test. But so you can do more than just test them this way. You could also germinate them this way, and we'll talk about germinating things more as we go on. But just like that, everything is kind of like what you want to do and what you're trying to get out of it, and trialing different things. So the germination test is cool. You could document that in your log and see, and also like where you're getting the seeds and what your end results are that year. And then you have something about seed storage, and I think that goes with the germination test, is like I think you were saying like maybe in the past, I don't know, for the garden resource program, if you were utilizing like seeds that were multiple years old, versus maybe just spending some money and getting more, like when it pays off to get new seeds or not. And I think you just pulled up a spreadsheet that will tell us, like, on average, how long the different kinds of seeds are viable for.
Yes, and so if you're a garden resource member, I know you all got some leftover GRP seeds. Yeah. And so, working with new seeds or working with old seeds, not every single seed is the same, and they might have different shelf life, especially depending on if you store them properly, keeping them in a cool, dark place and making sure that they're dry. And so if you were to do those correct practices, even in that, there's still there's a period of when that seed is, viable. And so this sheet right here just simply gives us the best longevity period for like each type of seed. And so for your usage, like if you want to, and this is to ideally help you save time from if you want to do a germ test or not, like, okay, my watermelon seeds, they're 1 year old. So, I can, and they were stored properly, I can feel fairly comfortable about, starting a watermelon transplant or, direct sowing that watermelon seed. And then if you got something like, let's see, leeks or lettuces, for example, that's 1 year. And so if you got some lettuce seeds that you have left over, from last year, you might want to do a germ test on that. If it's 2 years, you might be on that, maybe I need to buy some new seeds. If it's 3 years, you're like, okay, maybe I should compost this, or, let's do a germ test. And the germ test, of the germ test that you do, you're just taking a percentage of those seeds and germinating them, and then using that as a baseline to figure out, what percentages that you have. So if you, for example, have 100 seeds, you want to do a germ test of 10 seeds. And if 80 seeds of those germinate, then that means you have an 80% germination rate. And that's a fairly decent amount to germinate seeds and use seeds from. And there's also optimum or ideal germination ranges here as well. And so if you got a 60% germination rate, you should feel fairly comfortable if you have some asparagus or beans and so. So this is just a nice simple sheet to kind of help you save some time.
Thanks for sharing that. That is really useful.
All right, and then I wanted to just highlight a note about purchasing seeds and so on. And so understanding how much seed you need to purchase. We went over the germination rates. Typically, seed companies share their germination rates. Like after you purchase like the seed packet, it's usually written on the seed packet. They also have the year that seed was is from on the seed packet as well. But if that information isn't provided, you can always contact that seed distributor and get that information directly. You can even get more information about the seed, like how much did that seed weigh. That can give you an indication of like the health of that seed as well. So there's a lot more information that you can get just by contacting your seed provider. All right, going on to the next slide. Anything to add to that, Merle?
Yeah, just looking at that Fedco seed packet, I think it's Thai basil, and every seed company is kind of does it different. Usually there's this same basic info, but sometimes the description is more or less, and sometimes it can be confusing. So yeah, I think that's a really good reminder that you can always like try to contact the seed company, because that's kind of why they're there, and they're the experts on that seed that they're selling. And instead of just not knowing and not asking. And like I guess like I would believe what's on the seed packet, but if you're reading it and you're like, that just doesn't make sense, like I've done this before, like trusting yourself and like calling them or asking somebody else, because your experiences are valid, and sometimes they make mistakes on the packets, I've noticed, and say weird things.
And then I'll also add that seed packets will typically have those, it will typically read, start this transplant, X weeks before, first frost or last frost, excuse me. And so then you can use that to, make a baseline of, okay, well, my first frost is going to be somewhere between, May 1st, May 31st. how many weeks before that do I need to start these transplants inside? And so it's going to have that key information there as well.
I
Yes.
have one thing to say, Kello, is like, okay, let's like talk about tomatoes. When you just said the range of, the first frost date, and as a beginning seed starter, I think tomatoes are like one of those things people are excited to start. And it seems like there's such a variety of when you'll see people starting to start their tomato seeds, and everybody has their own way about it. And what would you like recommend to people who are just getting started when there are so many different ways to do it? And for example, with tomatoes, like how can somebody figure out for themselves when it really is best to start their tomato seeds?
Yeah, I mean, first it's understanding where that tomato seed is going to go. So whether it's going in a greenhouse or a hoop house or in the field, or it's going to go inside. There are different environments that you need to take into consideration there, but let's assume you're going to be planning to get outside, like I feel a lot of people will be. My ideal start time or start period for tomatoes, starting them from seeds, is going to be week 12 through week 14.
Okay.
And so for my bigger tomatoes, like your big beef, your slicers, your heirlooms, I'm starting those in week 12. My smaller tomatoes, sun goats, black cherry pepper tomatoes, excuse me, I'm starting those in like week 13, week 14. And so that's kind of my period that I like to work with. And so, as Merle mentioned, there's a lot of different practices within farming. It's not a monolith. There is no right answer with farming. We're just trying to, as much as possible, successfully grow food. And so food is very diverse. There's a lot of different climates and so on. And so, if you do something one way, it doesn't mean that it's the right way or the wrong way. It's not even about that. And so don't be too worried about finding something that, that is like a perfect match for you. There's a range and there are many options and many different ways to do things, and so on. And so let's move into some of the materials that you might want. And so many of these things were covered in the previous class, but we will highlight a couple of these materials that you might need. And so we'll just go through a couple of slides and highlight some key points. And so I'll start us off here. And so now we're gathering the materials that we need before we get to start our transplants. And so we understand the planting season, how to purchase our seeds. Now it's about those materials before we get started. And so at Keep Going Detroit, we use a potting mix made up of a starter mix, typically like Sunshine here. That's basically Canadian peat moss. It's perlite, res lime, which is a wetting agent, and so on. And then it has lime in it. And what all those different things do, the most important and most prominent of those ingredients are going to be that peat moss and that perlite. And then another thing that's important is that wetting agent, because that peat is naturally hydrophobic, meaning that it dries out and then it doesn't want to get wet again. And so they add that in there to just help it keep moist. And then the res lime does the same thing pretty much. And then the lime, peat is naturally acidic on the pH scale. And so to get it to a range where it's ideal for plants, they add the lime to, get that in a ideal range of about 6 on the pH scale. And pH means potential hydrogen. And I guess we won't go into more depth about that, but that's basically what those ingredients do. And that's what you'll typically see in a basic organic starter mix. And so once we have that, this is like our main ingredient here. We like to add compost to our mix. That's going to be some nice organisms for our plants. And I see the questions coming in. Feel free to ask them if you do. And then we like to add compost, nice organisms, nutrients, and such for our plants to kind of help extend their nutrients availability. And then we add 1 cup of amendments of your choice. Some typical amendments are blood meal, rock phosphate, potassium. We have a slide in here about that. And so now what you need to know about, getting this mix and why we used it. The sunshine mix isn't available. That's a very old picture. There has been some change-ups in the supply chain, particularly with availability of certain mixes. But what you need to look out for is that you just have a mix. And this is what we like to use, something that just has peat moss and perlite as the base. There are different things that you can use in your potting mix. If you don't want to use things like peat moss, which is basically, them cutting down and shredding trees. You can use things like cocoa coir as a substitute for starting your transplants. That's one that's, easily available and so on. And, you can make your own mix, but this is what we typically do at Keep Growing Detroit. But if you're looking to purchase something from like your general food store or growing store, just look for something that has peat, perlite, and that's basically, very similar. I do caution people to stay away from mixes and media starter mixes, transplant starter mixes that are heavy. They should be light. You shouldn't use soil, because soil is going to have it's going to be a lot more heavier for those transplants and the root systems to develop in when they're super young. These are plants that aren't, native to, our environment per se. And so it's just going to be a little bit harder for them to get established as youngings. And so that's kind of what I caution people to, stay away from as they're getting first started with making their own starter mix. And as the mix, a simple mix is just 2 parts soil bags, whatever size that is, and then 1 part compost, equal to what those parts are, the 2 parts are, and then a cup of your amendments. We'll go through, and we'll also talk about worm castings a little bit later, and and so on. And Merle, are there any particularly mixes or differences that you use for your own setup?
Great. Thanks, Akello. I was thinking first about how there's the kind of difference of how we talk about like a seed starting mix versus like a potting mix, and what that means, like when you're going to start your seeds and you're looking for like a more sterile environment for your like little seeds to have the best chance to be healthy and live and everything and grow, versus your potting mix. That is, in my mind, when I'm using that, it's more what I'm going to be potting the little seedlings up into to have them there to get even bigger. And so for example, I just pulled up like a picture I took of when I was working at an herb farm, and we had our transplant production, we had the seeding mix and then the potting mix, and what we used to kind of create our own mix was Pro Mix. And there's a few different kinds, but it comes in like a cube if you're doing any sort of quantity, or it has like, they come in the bags that you're showing in that picture, that size. But we added this similar amount of like the amendments or nutrients, but for the seeding mix, we just used the Pro Mix with those nutrients, versus the potting mix is when then we added in the compost with the Pro Mix and the nutrients. And I think the idea there was the compost might have been a little heavier, or a little like had some little wood chip particles, or little, like it was pretty fine compost, but still more uncertainty and the texture and the, what the little seedling might like be having to push up against. And I don't know, at KGD, what are you doing? Are you using a different thing for the seed starting versus when you're potting some of your stuff up bigger?
Yeah. So when we look for a mix, we're looking for something that's, light, doesn't have that many things in it. So that's why we're adding compost, we're adding our amendments, we're adding those things that we like, so that we can, customize it and, have that longevity, because, there's not that much nutrients, after that seed coat. The seed has the embryo and all of that, and it's some energy to get, started. But the peat moss and the perlite, that's not going to be enough for that entire month for that plant.
Yeah.
And so that's why we add things. So like, that's great as a starter mix where you're just trying to get those seeds to germinate. But we're kind of creating our own potting mix. Potting mix meaning that it's going to be in there a little bit longer
Mhm.
by adding compost, by adding those amendments, and so on. And so that's been a practice that we've been using, and even the student organic farm I've been at for like years. And so kind of giving us a little bit more freedom to make our own. And one change that we're making this year,
Right.
and we are moving to for Keep Detroit purposes for the Garden Resource Program transplants, we're moving to a pre-mix that we're purchasing from a Michigan company called Dairy Do. And they have a pre-mix where the compost is mixed in, the amendments are mixed in, and all that's already mixed in, prepackaged for us to simply just take out and put into the starter trays that we're using for our transplants. And so that's something that we'll be testing out this year. And when people come out to the farm, they can see how that looks. But it's basically just the same principle, but just pre-mixed, and hopefully a little bit easier on our backs and so on. That's a lot of mixing of soil. We got 3,000 flats that we do within a year and such. And so, there are those other considerations to take in, especially if you're gonna, as you're scaling up.
Yeah.
And such. All right, let's move to the next slide. So this is just explaining, well, this is the fertilizers that we use, the dry fertilizers that we use. So we have a blood meal that we add, or that we've been adding to our compost, or excuse me, our starter mix. So we did brown rock, which is a rock phosphate. This is basically your NPK, your nitrogen, potassium, and your nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate, that you're adding with these. And so they have all their own different needs within the plant that they address and help out with. But this is like your basic macro nutrients that we've been adding to our transplants. And that's just like, a lot of this won't be available like to the plant instantly, but as that plant is developing and out in the ground, then they'll be able to, once these break down, then those will be able to help out the plants. The blood meal, that's going to be available a little bit faster because it's of a different composition. But this is just what we use in our system. And so we're adding a cup of that to each of the batches that we make for our transplants. And so, your system can definitely look a lot different. You can use things like kelp as a substitute. There's also something called azomite. There's so many other different nutrients out there. Try everything. Like, just keep in mind, you might not see the results of them based on like how they break down instantly. So you just got to keep that in mind. So like, it's for the plant a couple months down the line. All right. Any nutrients that you add to yours, Merle?
Actually, I think you covered it all. The last one was the azomite. So those four, from my experience, like working at the herb farm and the nursery there, it's the blood meal, rock phosphate. It was referred to as green sand.
Yeah.
Is that and then the azomite. And I'm still kind of getting familiar with, like, because when I was starting, I would get more of like the pre-mix stuff. And then this was my first experience kind of like making a bigger batch of my own at the job I was referring to. And like it looks like that picture that you're showing, like we used the mason jar. It was like, remember, like one jar is actually 2 cups. Getting that in, like, right. But then like, and so I then like sourced my nutrients from my work because they had them in bulk. But this year I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna be buying them myself. And like I was wondering, Kello, maybe if that's gonna be coming up with the nutrients as far as like how you can make sure that where you're sourcing it from aligns with your growing practices, whether it's organic or whatever terminology. Because like there's so many different nutrients out there these days.
That's true. It's the biggest distinction. Like, blood meal's an easy one. That's just, pig blood, basically. Yeah. But, you're pretty much safe with anything that's going to be broken down from minerals. So like rock phosphate, potash. those are very easy ones to for certain practices that you want to do. Now, as far as like organic growing goes, like blood meal is allowed within the National Organic Standards Board and such. So, no worries around there. But, there are other options outside of blood meal, like, we'll talk about worm castings and such. But, there are tons of options of nutrients to use, whether they're going to be water soluble or liquid and such. Though I do prefer minerals that break down slowly, because to a certain extent you want to baby your plant, right? But you also still want your plants to work. And to naturally, spread the roots within the soil and do the work of sequestering those nutrients from the minerals and such. And so I prefer nutrients that break down over time, because it gives that plant what a plant naturally does. If your nutrients are always available to your plants, it's kind of similar to just having your plants on an IV drop. You just they're not really testing out their muscles, spreading the roots and such. I want my roots to spread as much as possible, reach within the soil, and so on. And so those nutrients and minerals that can break down slowly over time. And then you can also pair that with those nutrients that are more speedily available, like your fish emulsion, your kelp, and so on. And so there's many different practices as you get more experience with it. But and then there are always going to be those styles and such, like mine that I just mentioned, that are going to show up in your own growing style. And so there, as we said, there's so many different ways to farm, and personalities do show.
Hey, Kilo. And so just real quick on the nutrients, like if you're not adding nutrients or not adding the right nutrients, what are some things that you're going to see as a result? Like, are we talking slower plant growth? Are we talking more disease? Are we talking yellowing leaves? Like, what are the things that you're going to are going to be indicators to you that oh, maybe I need to add, I'm thinking like we have a scale of people here on the call. Like some people have a couple raised beds in the backyard and just want to do a few. So they might not buy all of the amendments, you know what I mean, that you're saying. So I'm just wondering, if you just got some potted mix, threw the seeds in, and you didn't use the amendments, what could you expect to see?
Yeah. And I don't want to make the amendments be like a must-have, right? Ideally, you're getting all the nutrients and the minerals that you need from the soil, right? But some soils might not have that all available, and thus we're making use of amendments to address certain needs. And so I don't want to make it like you have to have this, right? These are just things to help improve or address certain lapses. And so your plants are going to tell you what they need. Each plant has their own way of showing nutrient deficiencies. It is going to have to be trained by looking at your plants often and getting used to seeing that, because so many signs, from having pest damage to nutrients damage to being overwatered to being underwatered, some of these things can start to look alike. But typically, and we'll show a picture in a later slide, your first signs of nutrient deficiencies or some type of stress on your baby plants are going to show on the first starter leaves of your plant, the cotyledon leaves. This is the mother leaves that the mother plant leaves with the seedling, and that's the first ones that we see. And so as that plant grows up, the first signs that you're going to see are going to be on those cotyledon leaves, and typically they might turn yellow or such. And so that's going to be your first indicator, or there might be other places as well, but that's going to typically be your first indicator of signs of something's wrong, or something's out with your plant. And so from there, it's using your experience and taking time to do a diagnosis, because that could just simply mean that, oh, maybe you just need to pot up your plant, maybe it ran out of space, or maybe it means like, oh, there's not that much nutrients in here, so maybe I should just, add a little bit, or maybe I should just give it some more soil. And typically sometimes it's just a simple thing of potting up that plant. Or or maybe it could be some pest damage that's stressing out this plant, maybe I should take a closer look at my plant. So as a baseline, and also like a visual indicator, oh, your plants are green, and then you see something yellow.
Mhm.
So, that's just your plant giving you visual cues. And then it's up to you as the grower to figure out how to diagnose that. And there's so many different things. It does really just come with experience, being able to, look at your plant, be able to tell, oh, is this underwater, overwatered? Oh, is it not in the space of the roots? Or, oh, is there not enough nutrients in here? And so there's, it's a fun time, figuring out, what your plant needs. And a very simple way to address that in my book would be to simply pot that plant up, give it a little bit more space. When you give it more space, I assume that you're also giving it a little bit more nutrients as well. And we'll also talk about how to check your plants as we go on. And so, yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Merle? Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna ask if maybe we wanted to jump into putting these seeds in our media mix and thinking about germinating them.
Yeah. Let's quickly go through some of the basic materials. And so this is just a couple of slides just to show like some of the things that you will need, and we'll get to the meat of it. I know we do have a time limit, and so many of these things were talked about in the previous class, but your grow setup can look as specific to you as much as possible. Make sure you have things like labels and such. You can use paper pots or and such, plastic bottles. Doesn't have to be super high tech, grow lights and such, along with timers. And you want to spend a little bit of time here on watering. It's probably going to be the most important thing that we do to our plants that really affect how they grow and so on. I really highly recommend having like a spray bottle, depending on your scale, but I really like having a mister. This is right here in the middle. It lightly spreads water on top of your plants. It doesn't really flood them or anything like that. And on my scale at the greenhouse, I do have like a, what's it called? A DRAM, DRAMM nozzle that I use on a larger scale, but that's also really nice soft water that I water my plants with. And I think I highly recommend that people come to the farm so that I can show them all this in practice. It's a lot more enjoyable to see there, and you can ask me questions and follow-ups, and also come and volunteer and such. And we also have murals set up here, I believe.
Yeah, just a picture of one of those, like they call them a Martha tent. And like there's like 4 or 5 shelves, and they're like $30 to $40. They can help keep the humidity in if you're trying to germinate, or if you're just growing in there. And that was what I was using right before. Like I scaled up to having some heated like rental space in a community greenhouse, but I still start the stuff in there.
Cool. And then we have recommendations for bottom watering. Well, for bottom watering, it's just going to be a matter of how your tables are set up. You're just going to have something that has a small tub to capture all that water in. And then I think one of the other notes about bottom watering is just making sure that each plant gets evenly watered still. Like some plants on the edge might soak it up sooner than others. But in my experience has been mostly with the overhead watering, and I do personally prefer overhead watering because there's more control that you have with your with how you put your water down and such. And Mira, anything to add for bottom watering? I believe you with your
well, I know that like in the beginning when you're getting them to germinate and they're really tiny, like misting them from the top is good. And then when they hit that certain point where you can start bottom watering them, that was something I was trying to experiment more with, because I do like to water from the top as well. But I think like whether we're doing top or bottom watering, it's just about consistency and even watering and kind of keeping track of what we're doing and looking for those signs of like under or over watering. But yeah, for the bottom watering, I was noticing that like a lot of the different like cell trays or whatever you're starting your seeds in fit differently into the trays. Like everything's kind of standard sizes, but a little different. So just finding something for your bottom watering that works, and then starting small with how much you're bottom watering and noticing how quickly the plants are absorbing that, and then making those fine-tune adjustments to make sure they're not sitting in the water too long.
Mhm.
And also that they're getting enough at the same time.
All right, thanks. And I also make a note about the size of the plant when you're bottom watering it, because
Mm,
plants at different stages in their life and sizes require different amounts of water. And so, as you're bottom watering, making sure that you're still able to give them that ideal amount of water um,
mhm.
as they're growing through those different stages. Um, just another simple note about airflow. Ideally, you want to have you just don't want standing air in your
Mhm.
grow setup. Um, Air is going to be how you manage pests and diseases.
Mhm.
That airflow is going to definitely help keep those diseases down, because if there's something that's wet consistently, then there's more likely that a spore or such will sprout, and then you have those type of issues. And so that airflow is going to be your first defense in your pest management of diseases. Anything to add to that, Meryl?
Just one thing about the watering is that I found super useful this year is I had been up until now just using the spray bottle like with my finger and the trigger and then I realized that there's like the pump manual mister too. So when I went to buy like a new spray bottle, it was like 259 or something. But then in that picture, if you go back, there's like one that's got like a little pump, and then you just like hold it down on the bottom left. So that's the one, that's my picture, and I just purchased that, and it was like 8 something. So it was only like $6 more, and it saves me a lot of time, and I just feel like I could get a more consistent even watering that way when I'm doing the like really like beginning stages, like kind of like your little Mr. Foggett attachment for a hose, but it seemed like for the smaller scale good.
And and then here we have a marrow syrup setup. So Mira, if you could share what we have
Oh,
here.
yeah. So my style of growing and everything is usually I have a hard time wanting to like drop a bunch of money right away. And that the thing about it, if you did like a lot of people did the indoor like setup class before this, and it says like everything that you could get to make the most ideal growing setup, but it's really hard to drop like hundreds of dollars like if you don't have it, or if you've never done it, or just because like there's so many other things to spend money on. And so I got these, you'll see it's a T5 high output fluorescent light system that I have, and it was in like a little tent that somebody gave me, and it was just really convenient. I got some like little ratchet straps that I hooked up, and you can see in the picture with the fan. I would like make 2 levels of that too, but in this case it was the beginning of the season, so an easy way to adjust the height of your light as your seedlings kind of emerge and start to get bigger, and like figuring out and fine tuning the distance if you're using fluorescent or LED, and I know they talked about that already. But yeah, just like the setup can look however you want, using like resources that are already available to you or that friends and family have, like hand-me-downs, um is my approach. So I think it's really cool that KGD has this like growth setup that you can sign up and hopefully get one of, because it's nice to not have to pay for that right away.
Nice. Thanks, Meryl.
Yeah.
And of your experience with this, I'd imagine these all weren't acquired at the same time. What was it like, going through that process of, your beginnings to, where you are now? What was
Yeah.
that decision-making process like?
I think still these days when I go to like I want more lights, it's like what am I gonna get, fluorescent or LED, and like how many watts is it, and the cost analysis. I do a lot of the thinking about how much it's gonna cost, like or like a lot of these like shelving units are like 18 inches deep, for example, but I really want a 24-inch deep one so that I can fit like a tray on there the best way. But it's so hard to drop like a few $100s on a new one. So I think like thinking about long term, what is gonna make your setup work best for you, and like where you want to splurge on things is something that I think about a lot. And in the end of the day, like if it's your passion, or if it's your business, then it is worth investing into. And I don't know about other people, but it can be really hard for me to do that. And I wanted to bring up some of the resources
Yeah.
KGB's been putting out in like the business farm classes, is like ways to like project your revenue and expenses. And I was wanting to bring that up, is like just making a basic spreadsheet can really be so helpful to like put your mind at ease if you are trying to scale up, or even if you're doing it on a smaller scale, just being like, okay, these are my expenses, and right now it seems like all I'm doing is spending money to grow some plants. And but if you like kind of look at whether it's your revenue or your goals, like how much you're going to be harvesting or whatever, that helps me know and feel more comfortable spending some of this money starting to get everything set up.
Gotcha. Very cool. All right. Let's talk about the KGD setup. So if you've all ever been at the Keep Going Detroit farm, we have a 30 by 140-foot greenhouse that has 2 heaters, one at the end, one at the other end, and then about 4 fans in the middle for air circulation and roll-up side vents. And we got about tables for our greenhouse or for our transplants and such that we fill up about 3 times a year. But it all really begins, all begins on a spreadsheet, but here at the farm, it all begins at our germ chamber here in the top right corner. So our germ chamber is our germination chamber where we start our transplants. And my particular system is a closed, no sunlight system where I have a water heater and a tank of water underneath that kind of steams water out. And so all that moisture is captured within this germ chamber, and thus, we're pre-soaking, we're watering our trays before we put them in, and thus they're going to get warmer by just the atmosphere of it. But then they're also going to stay moist because of that steam that's in there, and that's going to help those seedlings germinate a lot quicker because they're not getting dry anymore. And right now, this germ chamber is peeled back so you can see on the inside. But that foil right there, that's a reflective foil that repels the sun, and it also keeps the germ chamber cool so that I can have a little more temperature control. And so in a way, this is me, isolating the environment in there so that we can have an ideal temperature, ideal darkness, and so on for those seeds to germinate. And kind of a background into what our system looked like back in the day. Our germ chamber was a lot smaller. The current one holds about 60 flats in here at once. And ours back in the day maybe did about half of that. But the difference was that we had these trays and the shelves in there, and the same type of setups with the conduit. But that was wrapped around with the clear piece of plastic, and we had a space heater in there. And so we were very we do a lot at KGD, but we are very scrappy at the same time. And so it was just a bunch of shelves wrapped around with some plastic and a heater under the bottom. And and we produced transplants like that since my time there, probably well before 2016, all the way up till I just built this greenhouse maybe about a year ago, or this germ chamber a year ago. And so, germinating transplants, and we had a lot of errors with that last one because it was plastic, the sunlight hit it, and it wasn't opaque or anything. So the transplants got hot and dried out that way. And then also because it was a space heater, it was also dry air on the plant. So we had to, consistently water those plants. And so there was a couple not good things with that. But as we move up, just like Miro, you consistently make changes and improvements as you go on and such. And just through the simple understanding of the principles of germinating transplants, we're able to, no matter what our system looks like, we're able to germinate those seeds because we know that they need temperature, heat, water, and so on in order to grow. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of our transplant.
Yeah, and just about the germinating, it is really awesome and ideal to have like a cool germination chamber, especially on your scale. And also a lot of the times I've done it in the past is just like keeping them moist and putting them in the warmest place in my house that like isn't gonna, my dog isn't gonna get to, or my kid or something. And then like using those humidity domes and a heat mat if you have them. But even like just having your seeds in their little pots or a tray, and I think like keeping them consistently moist for me and not letting them dry out is my number one priority.
Before we changed our setup to that, drying out was our priority, back then, our major thing to look out for. But now moving to this system, our new priority is to make sure that our transplants don't stretch because they're
right.
Place. So we'll talk about those things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're germinating in a closed system, or like I was thinking, like if it's not under a light already, looking for like what's next, like after the seed germinates. That's what we're going to start talking about now.
Yeah. So like within our system, to kind of walk through people, and it really does depend on the system that you're in. Like our germ chamber, that's where everything starts. We pull out our transplants. So one thing that we have to look out for is stretching of plants where, your seed germinates, but naturally it's going to start to try and look for the sunlight. And if it's going to expend the energy that it has within that seed to do that, and that's not a great thing for your plants because a seedling can get very weak if its stem is very extended, and it's super detrimental to crops like your collards, kales, broccolis, your brassica family, really, because they're just so spindly. And and so within our germ chamber, we're checking that 3 times a day, definitely before we come into work, and also when we leave work as well, just to make sure that we don't let anything stretch. And so stretching, it's a natural process, but it's not it will naturally happen, but it's something that we just want to try and avoid from that. And so we take our plants out of the germ tray once we've got about a majority of the tray germinating, maybe about 70-80%. Then we just simply put it on our table where we have like a heat mat or such. And then our greenhouse is outside, so it's natural sunlight, so we don't have to worry about lights or such. And then from there, we take that plant once they're a little bit more of size. Their cotyledons are extended like this picture here. Then we're able to take that and pot it up into our 4-packs or 6-packs or so on. And so that's basically our pot up process. And then from there we're managing it. Then it's out to GRP members. But that's what our process looks like in a snapshot. How about yours, Merle?
Yeah, sorry. I was looking at this PowerPoint slide and just thinking about all the excitement of like actually putting the seeds in through the pots, and the depth and the spacing and everything, and all that stuff, like leading up to when you put them to germinate in your chamber or on their heat mat. and how exciting it is. And so yeah, what was your question that you wanted me to speak on?
Your process for your transplants, and so you start yours inside of your germination chamber, and then
Oh
or
yeah.
how does it look like
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah, so for the Project Lavender last year and this year, I ended up with the method like you see in that picture. It looks like it could be a germ test, but I actually put my lavender seeds in the fridge and a moist paper towel. And then actually like after like 10 days, they had started to sprout little tails. And so then I started like tweezing them out like with a pair of tweezers. I wasn't actually like grabbing them with the tweezers, but kind of scooped them out. And like I've been experimenting with the different size cell trays to see like what the different kind of medicinal herbs like for spacing and what my needs are. Like I put some in like but anyway, so I put the seeds in, lightly cover them with the soil like for their own individual needs. With the lavender, I just put a little indent in with a pencil and kind of cover them up, and then started keeping them moist. Or yeah, once the seeds germinated in the fridge, then I put them, I guess that would be your first like potting up into their little homes like you would see in the picture above it. But they're at a smaller stage. And then from there, growing them out. Actually, could you go to that one slide that's like just kind of the process that I went through and showing the different stages? Yeah, so I had like the planning of it, then I had my seeds germinating in the fridge, and then that first picture on the bottom left, that's when those sprouted seeds started poking out from the dirt that I put over them. And then you can see like they're starting to get their true leaves in the next picture. And then they that last picture is when I went to pot them up. And I was just using different like indicators of like how the growth looked above, and then also checking for like how far the roots had grown out.
Yeah. Mira, is there a particular germination temperature that you like for your lavender or herbs in general?
Well, I thought the lavender is really weird, and this is like the cool thing about kind of like experimenting and everything, and just kind of like researching what other people are doing out there, because I couldn't find just like once. I mean, there probably is a set thing, but the way I kind of go about it, so my fridge is probably set at, I don't know, like 40
Mhm.
something degrees, and so I guess like trying to mimic the natural environment of like when the lab like perennials are going over winter, and then I'm still kind of understanding it all. But that really worked well. So like because I documented it, I am repeating that like process this year. But with other things like with the rosemaries that I just started in my bedroom, I just took them out of the seed, packet, put them in the moist like seed starting mix in the tray. You don't want to like overpack it or anything. And then I had the dome on it with the heat mat. So if you sign up for one of those kits and you wanted to like you got it right away and you wanted to start germinating, that's how I would do it. And like you were saying, like every morning I would wake up. So every morning I wake up and I see like, okay, what's germinating? And like with the rosemaries, I just put them under a light because a few had started popping up and I didn't want them to start stretching. So now they're under the light and they're not getting any supplemental heat, figuring that most of them are already probably in that stage of like they're sprouted underneath in the soil and they're going to be popping up in the next few days. So I have them under the light so that they don't start stretching. I guess my scale is pretty small still. So it's easy to be checking everything daily, and yeah.
Nice. A one practice that we do at the farm in terms of our where I have my germ chamber. For all our germination, I have our germ chamber set. Like I have a thermometer in there, kind of in the middle. If I can go back to the slide, just want to highlight this a little bit. So like close to in the middle here of the germ chamber, I have a thermometer. And then of course we have the heater in the bottom, but the thermometer is set so that that temperature stays for our germination purposes at 75 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like an easy baseline to keep for like all our different types of crops. And the majority of the that we're germinating inside of that germ chamber, or their range of what we like to, or what we grow, they enjoy 75 degrees. Now, if you want to break that down and get that more specific, your hot crops like your cucumbers, your eggplant, your tomatoes, and your peppers, they really love to germinate at around 80 degrees or so. Now that's just the germination rate to get those going. Other crops like your brassicas, collards, kale, and such, they enjoy germinating at around 70 degrees. And then your cooler crops like your spinach enjoy germinating at 60 degrees. And so that's to get a nice consistency with that. But for my germ chamber, I keep that set at 75 degrees, and that gets me going for like all the crops that we do for the garden research program, all the transplants that are needed for those.
Right.
And then my environment, so my greenhouse with the heaters and such, I don't have my heaters, cranking, keeping the environment at 70 or 80 degrees. Like that is not the goal. We have natural sunlight to handle that. Really what we're focused on is keeping once the plants are, a little bit in their teenage age, keeping that environment from not falling anywhere below 45 degrees or a 50-degree range. And so my heaters are set to keep everything, above that, not to go, not to push it to 60 or 70, because we want our transplants to grow slowly, to go slowly, take their time to grow, spread the roots, and and in some ways that is the quickest way, if you will. And so, the goal isn't really to push them to go, to their furthest or such. And so, as you keep that in mind, if with your grow rooms and such, you don't need your grow room to be, 70, 80 degrees. What you need is for the plant the area where your plant is to be, in that ideal temperature range, because that's just where your plant is. So you can have like plastic separating to keep that room or that part of the room warm, and the rest of the part of the room, regular temperature and such, to get that control and such. And and really love the example here, Merle, of really laying it out for us with your herb production. And looks like we have a transplant that is ready to be potted up. And so I wanted to us to walk through that pot up process. And so for different methods and styles, it looks a little bit differently, and we're looking out for the same principle of things. But where I wanted you to explain, what's your process look like for potting up plants?
Well, I like it at the scale that I'm doing at, where I can really kind of take my time and baby them. And so that's my approach. It's like, it's not just the business, but it's also like therapeutic and all the energy and stuff that's going into it. So like, I know for like a larger scale production, it's not like possible all the time, but, so yeah, another thing I wanted to say to people is like, when you're doing these potting ups, like you can get nervous or like worry that you're gonna like hurt the little seedling, and that could happen. But I think in general, like you have your own like good, like you'll be able to trust yourself when you're handling them, just being careful. And like in the picture, like you can see I'm like holding it and there's the roots, and so like being careful with the growth on the top. But so I like to do it over a tote. I have like my potting soil, I have some containers. I think you can see it in that picture too, that I'm holding it over. And then like, so I'll kind of like half fill the container or whatever container you're using, get a little bit of soil in there, like depending on how big the plug or the little seedling is. If you're just like kind of like taking out seedlings from like an open flat, it might be different than if you have like a more of like a bigger plug like I have in that picture. And I'll have like, and then I'll kind of like place it in, and then I kind of like gently scoop in a little bit of the media mix around it to just kind of like let it all situate, and kind of finding that right balance between, you're not like trying to pack it all in there. You want the roots to be able to have like space and like to like grow in, and also like the level that you're filling it to is you want the just barely covering the top of like the little plug, or if you're just, I don't know, maybe you could talk, Akello, about when you're taking like the little ones like that you start in the open tray. You could tell your experience about that. But for me, it's I probably over baby them and take like extra time to just make sure they're all like tucked in nicely, and like sometimes I'll kind of like do a little like shaking my hand just to like let everything kind of like naturally settle. And I find that it's like the most enjoyable and exciting part for me, but it can also feel like a little stressful, or like, are these things really gonna turn and grow bigger? And sometimes I was like with the lavenders, like they kind of were a little weird as seedlings. Like they were overall healthy, but like I had my doubts and questions, but I just kind of kept going and trusting the process. Like these plants are gonna like figure it out, and I'm gonna give them the best environment I can for them to do that and do their own thing.
Quick question on that. I
And
know we're running low on time, but just quick question for like the smaller scale
Yeah.
folks. Would you ever not suggest people start germinating right in the tray that they're going to be potted up in? You know what I mean?
I wouldn't dissuade anybody from doing that. It really is a matter of capacity and space, and so we stuff all the seeds in there inside the germ chamber because it's small, or you're starting all your seeds in there because like your area to start to keep your plant super warm is small. And so, but we know that we can pack seeds in together, and when they're super young and in seedling form like this, like they're okay to be next to each other like that. But we know as they get older and as they want to develop and grow, they're going to need more space. And so it really is a matter of setup. So if somebody wants to start their seedlings in a pot, the only thing they have to be mindful of, like I'd imagine that pot is, they just have to make sure that temperature can still reach that ideal range, no matter how high that soil is or such. It just has to be able to, we just have to be able to germinate that seed, and that seedling should do very well in there. But
Okay. And then just in case people are going to drop off around 3, I wanted to make sure everybody saw the sign up for the indoor growing is right in the chat box. So please do sign up. We'll be distributing those next weekend. So Keto and I will be reviewing the application Monday and giving a shout out to come if you're selected to get a kit. So please do grab that link, and then we'll just keep going. But I just wanted to make sure people saw that in case folks drop off at 3.
Thanks.
thank you. And we'll try to wrap up this part around 3:15 maybe, and try to save some time for some questions at the end. Is that all right, T, if we end at 3:30?
Yeah, we can keep rolling, and whoever can stay, and we will have this recording go out along with the PowerPoint to everybody who registered for the class if you had other things to do right at 3.
All right, appreciate it, T. Thank you. And I just want to follow up on a question you asked. Yeah, if I remember my thought, but the question about why we germinate our seeds, like this. Oh, seems like I lost my thought due to the segue, but if I remember, I'll bring it up. But I do also want to point out before I explain like how Keep Growing Detroit does their pot up process is that the plants do tell us how they're feeling. And so if we look at these pepper transplants in here and the ones on the right, and if we compare the ones on the left, or at least the ones on the left side of me, we could see that the pepper leaves are kind of planted up because they're very cold right now. And so that's them trying to hold in their temperature and heat. And if we look at them on the other side, you can see that their leaves are starting to spread out. And so that's more of a sign of those plants being healthier, having more space and more heat and such. So there are different signs that your plants give you. I really noticed that one last year during our production. And of our transplant production at the Keeper Detroit farm. So we have a kind of a 3-part series. So in the germ chamber and the strip tray on the heat mat, and then into the 4-inch pots. And so our process, what we're just looking out for, core principles, we don't want to disturb the root systems. It's okay that that root system is clear of soil if the soil breaks off. The most important thing that we want to make sure is that we don't ever damage the roots. And so typically we instruct our volunteers and such to handle the plant by either it's one cotyledon leaf at a time and not to operate the plant or hold the plant by the stem. And so because we say that, because the plant has 2 cotyledon leaves, so if in case one of those leaves break off, that plant has another leaf to get it to its next stage of growth. And so using that method and teaching people to just start off slow as they're transporting their plant into the next spot. And another general rule of thumb is to make sure that that root is completely covered once you get it into its next tray, completely covered with soil so that the sunlight doesn't dry that root out. And a nice simple rule of thumb that I like to have is cover that stem, or bury that plant half of its stem all the way through. So just the one half of that plant is sticking up out of the soil. And that's generally going to be enough for that plant to get to that next stage of its life. And so we're potting up probably thousands of plants. That's going to be an exciting time for the farm, and that really gets kicked off close to on the 2nd week of March. We'll begin our transplant production and such, and that goes on all the way up through April, and then we take a break, and then that gets started again in June for our fall crop production. So if people want to see what that pot up process is like, or even just come to the farm and see what production looks like on that side and get a behind the scenes view, feel free to stop by anytime. All right, anything to add to the pot up, Merle?
Oh, I just think it's so cool that that Keeper in Detroit is having that option for people to go to the farm and get this hands-on experience learning, because that seems really the best way to apply all these things that we're talking about. And the sooner that you can do it physically after learning is so cool. I love KGD.
Thank you, appreciate that. And we have a bit of a checklist just to help people keep things in mind as they are working with their transplants, to give them a baseline of things to do as they're checking their plants to make sure that the growth of those are successful. And so I like you, Merle, to share, what do you typically do when you go into your grow room or go to the greenhouse? What are you checking for? What's on your checklist?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll do, let's say I'm at like the space I was renting some last year, and I'll do it again this year, like the community greenhouse in Brightmoor. They have a really cool germination chamber there. So like seeing like if things have germinated yet, and they're pretty cool about helping you. Like they'll pull some out if they look like they're ready to start being like on the table. But you still want to peek in and see what's going on, because like having your eyes on everything, that's my first thing, is just getting my eyes on everything to see if there's any like major problems that need like immediate action, like something dried out really bad, but hopefully that never happens. And then I like to get close up to the plants. Like if you see like in the one picture, like I had the light like close to the ground, and so just getting up close and seeing what things look like, and then assessing my watering needs and just checking to see if my lights need to be adjusted. Really, yeah, checking the lights, making sure things aren't stretching, or say you're trying out like an LED, but you've been using fluorescence, you're wanting to see if there's any sign of like the heat or light damage. Taking notes. I like to check my timers every once in a while, especially if you have other things going on in your grow area, because they could easily kind of get set off. And Checking the temperature. Yeah, I like to use one that will show like the minimum temperature, so I know overnight in my bedroom how low it got. And like Akela was reminding us, you don't like need the whole room at that temperature, just the place where your plants are growing. And so some of them have like a little sensor too, like you can put it where you want that actual temperature read. So checking like my minimum temperatures. Thinking about what my next steps are going to be is usually at the end of my checklist. What I'm going to be looking at for that upcoming week and how I can plan for that. So, you know, if I set aside, if I have that 4-hour chunk of time to pot something up, I already have my potting soil, my trays, or whatever else I might need.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. Merle, that's a really important point of figuring out, what's the next steps. That is a huge thing. For me at the Keep Growing Detroit farm, really the first thing that I check, well, naturally I have to check the greenhouse to make sure that, the structure is, safe and, well enough to keep on producing our transplants and so on. But once we're inside the greenhouse, the first thing that I check is our germination chamber. And so I'm looking to make sure that plants aren't, drying out, that the water is full in the tank, that the heater is working, and then pulling out any transplants that need to be pulled out and so on, then moving those over to like our heat mats for their next step in their production and such. And then after that, it's a check of the heaters, making sure that the temperature within the entire greenhouse is where I'd like it to be. And then doing any venting if I need to. If it's sunny outside, then that means that it's probably going to be about maybe 10 to 20 degrees warmer inside the greenhouse. And so I need to make sure that our temperature doesn't get above 80 degrees, because at 80 degrees, it's harder for plants to grow. They just really just shut down, start to expire a lot more and need a lot more water. So that's important to keep mind of. But then after that, I like to walk through my plants, take pictures of my plants, because that's like a record in itself. It's always good to be able to look back and look at the progress of your plants to see if anything's different or such, or just to reminisce as well. But when I get closer to my plants, I'm looking at them, looking for any yellowing of leaves, and also seeing if there's any pest damage. So like typically that looks like some type of leaves that are, looks a little bit deformed or such. That's a simple sign of pressure. Checking for watering, lifting the entire tray of that plant. You just can't, look at something and completely tell if it's dry or not. You need to lift it. So getting that feel of what a dry tray or a dry pot or cup feels like, or what a wet one feels like. What does a overwatered one feels like? What does an underwatered one feels like? And so just getting a feel of your plants and then just being able to look at them and, spot and see what those signs are that they're telling me. And so looking under the leaves, over the leaves, above the leaves, the entire part of the plant, checking to see if there's any pests or any diseases and such. And then from there, being able to, make a plan on how to move forward from that. And on our tray, and a particular nuance of our greenhouse space, we have tables that are, where on the edges, things dry out quicker because they're on the edge, there's more airflow. And so, being able to know what the particular nuances are of your growth setup and how to, address those as well is something that's good. And I guess before the end of the day, we decide if we want to put anything new inside the germ chamber or, take something out before we leave, because sometimes things can germinate, overnight, and then you might not be able to get it at night. And so in some cases, we need to make the decision, okay, well, we're going to pull something outside. I'm going to pull something, pardon me. We're going to pull something out of the germ chamber and just put it on the heat mat, so that if they, germinate outside there, they're okay because you're not going to stretch. And if we still wanted to, germinate a little bit more, we can just come back the next morning and put it back in the germ chamber and be able to pull it out maybe a little bit later in the day. And so there's different practices and things that you can do to, help your plants germinate a little bit more ideally on your timeline and such. Any follow-up questions for me, Merle? Oh, looks like you're muted.
I'm sure I could ask you a lot of questions. I had some in mind, but I know like we're kind of we've already run over a little bit. So, yeah, maybe if anybody wanted to post a question in the chat, that could be a cool way to use the rest of the time.
Cool. And then I just have this picture here for just to show the plant identification. So those cotyledon leaves, these are, well, this is a picture of curly kell at different stages. This is curly kell at different stages, and I'll get to the question in a moment at different stages. And then the one thing that I wanted to point out or highlight is that those cotyledon leaves, those are the first signs of like stress on a plant. And so, but then we can also see that another sign, if you have cotyledon leaves that are still green, that's a sign that your plant is doing very well. So the longer that those cotyledon leaves stay on that plant, a more indicator of, how well that plant is gonna do and thrive. And then just a picture here just to show the true leaves of a plant. So as you're working with different plants, like at the Keep Growing Detroit farm, where we have different types of crops, brassicas, in that family, they all have the same cotyledon leaf. Solanum crops, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they all have the same cotyledon leaves. As we're working with them, those things can easily get mixed up and such. And labeling is super important for, keeping track of all of that. And then also just understanding that, there are different nuances between the same cotyledon leaves. So for example, like a pepper plant and the eggplant might have like the same cotyledon leaf, same with a tomato, but we could tell that, or as you work with your plants, tomato plant has a lot more fuzzier cotyledon leaves. The pepper has a lot more leathery cotyledon leaves, and the eggplant is kind of a little bit more softer and such, and a little fuzzy, but not as fuzzy as a tomato. And so there are different ways for you that you'll pick up on as you're working with different plants and such. And we'll just try and see to quickly go over our last few slides. Merle, could you share some of your general watering tips, and then we'll try and get to these questions.
Yeah, I think we mostly covered it all. Thinking about the needs of the individual plant, most of them are similar, but some might be different. The watering evenly, whether it's from the top or the bottom, making sure that you get the edges extra because they might dry out sooner. Watching for signs of overwatering, like algae on the top. And then if you do get that, it's not the end of the world, especially as they're getting older, they're able to like defend themselves better from some other things that might kill them when they're little babies and are battling with the algae. But like if you do get the algae, then you might have to take steps to make sure that water is like absorbing through that layer. But I think, yeah, just like trusting yourself and kind of like being patient and not trying to overcorrect right away either is important.
Cool. And I'll add one note about the algae. So when that does happen, it is what you can do. Like you don't have to, because algae builds on the top layer of the soil. Like you don't have to keep on using that same soil. You can manually separate that algae out from your tray or cup and just remove that and just put in new soil around your plant. Yeah. And you'll be totally fine. You don't have to continuously, manually have to water, but that's typically something that you see with a lot of overhead watering. So underhead or bottom watering should have a more of an advantage with keeping algae in check. And a simple note about common things that you all will see, hopefully not. Dampening off, it's when it's a fungi that attacks the stems of our seedlings. And so it's really hard to, well, it's naturally within the soil. So it's really hard to avoid it. It does pop up in many germinations. And so it's important that you germinate a good number of seedlings to address potential loss. But there are things that you can do to mitigate that. And so dampening off, it's a fungi that thrives in a wet environment. So by managing your watering, by making sure that you have cycles of being, wet, but also drying off in a decent amount of time, and having that consistency, you can keep dampening off in mode and such in check. When you are, and I kind of want to go back to a picture just to show, when you are, germinating your seedlings really thickly like this, and I got some cabbages in the background, you are way more susceptible to having mildew pop up. And so it's important that you spread out those seedlings if you're doing them in bunches and such, because here there's not that much airflow. It's nice and muggy in there. It won't dry out so quickly. And so, mold can pop up if we don't, manage those correctly. And so like spreading out your sowings and your seeds as much as possible will help mitigate that. And aphids, fungus gnats, spider mites, out of the more likely, spider mites are going to be pretty what you typically see on things like your cucurbits and such. But aphids and your fungus gnats are going to be things that you will commonly see. So for your fungus gnats, well, it all starts off with your schedule, checking your plants consistently. Of course, preemptive measures are best. So to deter things like your fungus gnats, it's all about watering. So that algae is what attracts those. That's what they're eating off of. And then they start to eat your plants as well. So managing your water correctly is going to be how you keep those in check. With your aphids, consistently checking those. Now on different scales, it's going to be, just a hand pick or, a simple wash of plants. But if you're on a larger scale, you can use things like neem oil or safe. That's a type of insecticidal soap. But if you are using neem oil, which is a common one that's easily available at your local store, local gardening store, you have to make sure that you emulsify it. And so that means mixing your neem oil with some soap, and then mixing that together, and then adding water before you start to spray your plants, and then making sure that you don't spray too much because you don't want to cover the the lungs or the breathing methods of your plants, if you will. And so making sure that you wash off your plants after you apply some type of spray to make sure that they can still breathe and such. And really just the key to begin with, or the most important thing that you'll ever do in terms of pest management is your preemptive or your foundation practices. It's always going to be, before it's a problem, that's when it's a problem, right? You want to make sure you don't get to that point. Anything you want to add to that, Merle?
No, I was just answering a few things in the chat, and what you were saying is great. Preventative measures to prevent the pests is always the best practice, and then when or if you do get the pests, just documenting what you do and how that works so that you'll know and be able to share that information.
And if you are on a larger scale, well, one thing that we're doing at the farm this year, we're using a flagging method where we're going to have like simple flags of like different patterns and such that we'll use for when we call out non-verbally. Like we'll just put a flag in on a tray. If we see something like, oh, this tray over here just doesn't get watered as much, or it dries out pretty fast, so we're going to use a flag to indicate that. Or we've seen some aphids over here, we're going to put a flag over there for spraying that area, or be careful with that area. So something to non-verbally indicate and keep track of, like pest pressures and deficiencies and such, to, well, especially if you're working in like a larger group and such. And this right here, this is a cabbage loopworm for all those brassicas out there. They really love that. This is the white moth that we typically see. And one thing that's used for that is BT, Bacillus thoraxis. Don't quote me on that one, but BT is what used for those. It's a insecticidal soap that breaks down within the sunlight, something that's approved for organic uses, and also and such. And for any of your sprays, really for successful application, it's going to be best to do that, to spray during the afternoon or when it's not sunny outside, because one, you can possibly, burn your plants if you're using something like neem oil, like that's an oil, sunlight. Plants are very fragile and such, and so it's best to do that at night. And then with like BT, like that breaks down because of sunlight, and so you ideally want to do that in late in the afternoon or at night or such. And then you want to come back in the morning and then rinse your plants off with just watering them like usual, so that those solutions don't stay on the top of the leaves. Any particular insecticidal soaps that you use, Meryl?
No, I think just because where I'm at scaling up, I'm just starting to I think mostly the preventative has been working best for me. And so knowing these things for when I do or might need them. But another thing with the medicinal herbs I like is they seem like, I don't know, a little more resistant in general to start with.
And I'll for the sake of time, I'll just speed through these last few slides so we can spend a little time on the hardening off part, and then we'll wrap it up. Worm castings, that's an excellent fertilizer to use. One way that I've used this before, I've taken the worm castings, mix it up with water, and taken that worm casting water and used it as a spray to spray on top of my transplants to just give them just a little bit as a foliar feed. And you can also use worm casting as a side dressing, meaning that you just take the worm castings and put it next to your transplant stems or soil and just let it water in like that slowly. Fish emulsion is great as well, easily available. You want to do it with the same method of like neem oil. You don't want to do it when it's nice and sunny because you will burn your plants. And you also might want to do it in a populated setting. Volunteers don't like it when I spray it when we're having volunteer activities in the greenhouse, understandably. So you want to do that at night or, when there's nobody else over there. And then you want to come back in the morning and rinse off that fish emulsion off that plant. And then kelp, very similar to worm castings and how you can use it as well. A option there. And then, Mira, we can spend some time talking about our last point, hardening off your transplant. So we've made it to the finish line.
Okay, cool. So I was just looking at, somebody had a specific question, maybe say they got the light, the grow setup kit from KGD, and they want to know exactly when to start and stop using the heat mat, and then when to stop using the heat mat or start using the lights, both of which help prevent stretch. So maybe there's a little confusion about that, and want to make sure we address Rebecca's question on that. I was going to answer. It seems like there's a sweet spot that you're trying to describe between you're seeing enough germination that, your needs in the germination chamber are mostly complete and they're mostly probably already starting to sprout under the soil. And so then you take them out because enough have germinated where you don't want those to start stretching. So you're moving it from the germination table to receive the light. And like you said, it's not hard and set. So if you say take it off your heat mat in the morning and you put it under your lights, and then as your lights are about to go off and you're I still kind of want the heat to kind of help with this last half or third of them to germinate, you can kind of go back and forth. And is that what you'd say, Akela?
that's what I'd say to interpret. So the question is when to start, when to stop heat mat and lights. Both of these help prevent to stretch. And so, so the thing, or I love to spend a lot of time with this too. So your heat is what, encourages your plant to grow and such. And so as long as it has that heat source, that plant is going to grow, stretch naturally or such as it should. And then your light is going to help, regulate that growth, make sure that that's all happening in coordinates with the plants and such. And so without that light, you just have growth, crazy and such. And so that light really helps control the growth of the plant. The heat encourages that plant to grow, and the water, makes that all possible. And so all those three things in combination helps your plants grow. And so depending on your style, let's say we just using my method, we have the germ chamber, there's no light in there, but there is heat. And so plants are going to germinate, they're going to grow easily, but I need to take them out and give them light so that they can grow properly. But usually they're all those seedlings aren't finished germinating, but the majority of them have. So I like to put them on the heat mat where they're outside in the sun. Like it's not super hot on the heat mat, but it's just going to help the rest of those grow a little bit quicker. And so that heat mat is basically there to just help me get to the finish line. And then once I see that the majority of that tray has germinated, it doesn't have to stay on that heat mat, especially if I have other plants coming out the germ chamber, that can take that place. So I can, move that tray of finished seedlings, off the germ chamber. They can, chill not outside, but they can chill on the table and, be okay, be ready for potting up or go on to the next process. And so, in words, both of them do help prevent the stretching method. One of them encourages the plant to grow, one help control that growth. As a wrapped up way to share that. Cool. Any other questions you feel we should get to? I guess while we're at it.
I think we've covered most of them, and if apologies if we did skip over any and didn't notice them. And I know, Akela, you were saying a lot of the times if people have specific questions related to your expertise, that you're usually open to being contacted and helping people on a individual basis when you have time.
Always. And if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in now. We'll make sure we get to them. But I want to make sure that we cover this last slide here. So we have when are our plants ready to go outside? So we germinated them, we've potted them up, they're in their next pot. And either we're not going to sell these plants, we're going to plant them outside. Ideally, your plant has about 2 to 3 true leaf sets on them. And so that's going to be like one of your major indicators for the health of that plant, or the stage of that plant being ready to go out. And then another way that you can look at it, you can, if possible, you can sometimes remove that plant from the tray and look at its root systems. If those root systems, aren't very defined, not very, showing like that soil ball structure, it just falls apart easily, then maybe that plant isn't quite ready to, go out. And this is definitely a method of, scale. Like, you can't look at every single root system of each plant. Sometimes you just got to look at a couple and make a decision, or look at a couple of true leaves sets and make a decision. But if you can have that time to give that care for that plant, take the time to do that. But before we, figure out, or after we make that decision if this plant is ready to go out, there is the hardening off process that helps mitigate and limit the amount of shock a plant experiences. Shock meaning that it takes time for it to, it's a new environment. It doesn't understand anything. So to help address that, we slowly introduce our plants to the elements. And that can look like, putting your plants outside during the day when it's nice and sunny, still outside environment, might be a nice day. Probably don't put them out if it's like snowy or, raining really hard. And then at night, you can bring your plants in, and you want to do that for about a week or so. And then your plants are ready for planting outside. And that's hardening off in a simple, direct way. If your plants are like, super cold hardy plants like collared scale or such, you can, if you want to, you can leave them outside and, hey, keep on watering them and whatnot. And I'm sure they'll do totally fine. With hot crops, you might want to be a little bit more delicate with them, bring them inside at night and such. Yeah. But, it's all flexibility thing. And it really is a timing thing and capacity thing. Imagine us at the KGD scale with all those transplants on the tables. We can't bring them outside, right?
Right.
So that's why we have to have the members do that. In some cases, some plants do get outside, but we can't do that for all of them. So it's important that we share that with you all to do that process, and that's just going to help that transplant. Transplant.
Yeah, and just a reminder not to rush the hardening off. If you have like a set goal, like for your planting date, I don't think it's worth rushing it to meet that goal, because you've put so much hard work and resources into it, and you're almost there, and you just need to be patient because they look strong and tough, and you've been mimicking the outdoor environment, but it's still not the same. Like I said, even like 2 years ago, I didn't even leave my tomato. It didn't seem that hot or that sunny, but it's still like, it was just too much on them. So doing it a little at a time, having like a partly shady area to start introducing them to. I took like a table out and put it in my driveway, and like basically it was like set up out there, bring it back inside. And yeah, like I think the hot crop hardening off is like where I think about it the most, for like you still need to do it with the cold hardy, but not the same necessarily.
Oh, that's a excellent point. And even after you plant your plants, your job isn't done yet. They still need help getting established, like those root systems haven't spread out. They're not able to get all the water they need for themselves. So even after that week of you planting them there, I highly recommend that you're checking on your plant daily, watering it, making sure that it doesn't dry out, really babying that plant until it starts to get more established, when you can start getting into that bi-weekly, weekly or such watering schedule that you have for your adult plants. So
yeah, and looking at the weather for your ideal outside conditions for planting, if it's like like when it was the hot crop planting time and we were getting like the 90-degree day stretches, like if you could find like the least like a little bit of cloud coverage and slightly cooler temperatures, like your plants will definitely appreciate that. And like maybe like watering them before you put them in, or you're just thinking about all those things. Like you said, it's not done. Maybe like even thinking about like the first 2 weeks in the ground as like still transplant time.
And I guess another a farmer tip I would share, like if you notice that we're going to get heavier rains and you just planted your plants out there, and like your entire backyard is flooded or such, like it's going to be really hard on those newly plants to get established. And so don't be hesitant to go in there and unplant your plants and put them back in the pot. We're just going to wait until it dries out or till this passes, because you don't want to lose that that effort that was put in those plants. And so there are things that you can do, and you can do that because the plant hasn't gotten established yet. Different for plants that are established, but those are just some tips and so on. And so thank you all for giving us this extra time. I really appreciate it. Are there like any last minute questions, any fire blazing rounds or speed rounds that we can do and such, and then we'll wrap it up.
You guys are awesome. You guys make a good team there. Back and forth. I loved it. I love the energy. You guys did great.
It's so hard to come.
Go ahead, Merle.
Sorry, just yeah, it's so hard to cover everything in the time frame. So hopefully,
Oh, yeah.
like this just kind of like starts the fire and or keeps it going and motivates you to keep connecting with other people and reaching out to KGD and the Garden Resource Program.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of thank yous in the chat. And if there's any final questions, feel free to come off of mute. We'll stay for a couple seconds. I know we're already over. So really thank you so much for joining us, Merle and Akello, as always, bringing the wealth of information.
Yeah, thanks everybody for attending. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you so much, Merle. It's been a pleasure working with you. Hope to see you in the field.
Mhm.
And thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thanks.
All
You too.
Peace, everybody.
And peace.